Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today is October 7th, 2020, and I'm back with another edition of the live show. And yesterday we had quite the sell-off out of the blue, which was pretty interesting. Based on some news that hit, it was that the stimulus that I guess the market was sort of counting on was not going to happen before the election. So that was kind of wild. And so anyway, let's take a look at the market, and then we'll take a look at the market, and then we'll take a look at the open trades real quick and see what everything looks like. Amazingly enough, um, let's take a look at a 5-minute chart. There's the big sell-off yesterday out of the blue. It started at, what time is that? Almost 3 o'clock, 2:50. All of a sudden, there's yesterday. Everything was going along great, and the funny thing is that, and look at this gap up this morning. So the market's got about half of it back, which is kind of interesting. But so let's go to the SPX here. It's what's really interesting about this sell-off yesterday is that it occurred right when the market sort of pushed through this prior resistance here, right? You can see all these highs here. So that created a prior resistance level, and then the market was about to break over that and actually, got a little bit higher. So the high yesterday was 34.31, right? This prior high here was 34.29. So a couple of points, and so it looked like a breakout. But what's interesting about this is this looks like a pretty nice inverse head and shoulders, which is kind of amazing. So if I was looking at this chart and somebody told me it was an individual stock, I didn't know what it was, no numbers, anything like that. I'd look at this pattern and I'd say, well, watch for consolidation over here and a breakout above this level and a move back to the highs, right? So you can see that. So, I mean, forming. There's the left, like inverted head and shoulders, whatever you want to call it. Left shoulder and the head, and the right shoulder is forming now. So be interesting to see what happens here, because obviously the market was sort of counting on fiscal stimulus, and so that may or may not happen. I mean, the whole thing may just be a negotiating tactic. I don't know, but anyway, politics aside, that's a pretty constructive looking pattern, to be honest with you. But then again, it could fail and take another leg down. So there's just no telling. But anyway, I wanted to go through the open trades and take a look at. There's quite a few open trades. We only had a couple that got knocked out yesterday, for minimal losses. They just didn't follow through. I think a couple of them were precious metal stocks, and but all in all, the open trades, I believe, fared pretty well. So take a look at the charts of those real quick, and like I normally do. First one is Yeti, the Yeti cooler maker. Look how nice that looks. That is just that's just a good looking chart right there, right? Nice uptrend, little dip, sort of recovered from that dip, and now it's back on the upswing. And so, interestingly enough, the initial stop is still in the original place. Hasn't moved yet. I would, based on what I'm seeing here, which is going to be a little bit delayed, I would say that pretty good chance that there's a pretty good chance that that trailing stop's going to kick up a little bit tonight. So we'll have to see. But let's see. I didn't put the target on here. Well, it hit the target. I've got the target on most of these, but sometimes when they first pop on the list, that's the one thing that I try and get the the trigger and the stop marked right away. But on Yeti here, the target was $50 even. So let me put that on there. Target 50 even. So Yeti's well, as we speak here, it pushed through the target. Now it's fading down a little bit. Real time price 49.86, but and there's let's see, 40, 50, 42 it's showing here. Yeah, it's still the 46.75 was the trigger price, but the open the following day was 47.31, so it may have actually tagged that target. I'm sorry, the compensation target, I should call it. So if you're inclined to compensate for the little bit of the gap up that happened there. I talk about that a lot on the show, but you don't necessarily have to do that, right? Um, Even if you pay a little bit more for it, you want to take some off at the actual target, then it's going to be a little bit easier to just a little bit closer. Of course, the targets are based on the ATR of the individual stock, and so it's something to keep in mind. Moving down the list here, Walmart, kind of a boring stock. Fared pretty good yesterday. This has got a nice pattern forming here, right? It's got a cup, and then like you get this little thing about Walmart is it's not a real exciting stock, obviously, and so I think I mentioned that when when we excuse me looked at it on the pending list. I mentioned how Walmart is, not too exciting. This was like a big earnings pop here, I believe, but this was either the earnings pop or this is when they were negotiating with TikTok, like part of the TikTok deal or whatever. That was kind of weird, and it really sort of made the stock go nuts. But anyway, so Walmart kind of shaping up here. Nothing too exciting. Then this next one here is this is something. This green dot. GDOT. Here's another one I forgot to mark the target on. The target was 54. Let me put that on here real quick because a couple of days after it triggered in, it just blasted right through the target. So you can see that the trailing stop as of right now is 55. The target was 54. This is a good example. Excuse me, choked up on my coffee this morning. This is a good example of why taking partial position at the target. And I don't know what the news was on this. I never actually looked at it, but on that particular long range day, but there's a target right there. So it just ripped right through the target. And so yeah, this is a good example. Now this one's got interestingly enough, has a parabolic stop up here at 60, right? So that's in the P stop column over here on the far right. So I haven't seen a lot of parabolic stops kick in recently, but there's another stock on the open trades. Basically, the P stop is going to kicks in when the stock makes a parabolic move, and you can see this in the documentation on the strategies page, but parabolic stop kicks in when the stock makes a unsustainable parabolic move, and it typically goes just under the low of the previous day. There was a parabolic stop under yesterday's low. I'm sorry, the day before, like right under that low there, 59.34. There was a parabolic stop there. I didn't mark it on the page, but I saw it. And so the idea here is that once those start to, once the stock makes a move like that, as of yesterday's close, it was up 20%. And as we speak right now, it's up another 2.7%. So the idea here is that you want to basically protect the previous day's low. when the parabolic stop kicks in. And so if you take half off at the target, it typically what happens is a stock will go up and go up and hit the target, and then sometimes later it'll make a parabolic move. This is highly unusual, but it happens. But anyway, once that parabolic stop kicks in, it just creates a good place to um, set the stop for any remaining shares that you hold, so that you're basically protecting the position. And so green dot looking good. The funny thing is that this was, look at this stock spent 2.5 months kind of just trading sideways in a range, not doing a whole lot. And but this little dip here was enough to put it on the pending list. Then it triggered in right over here, and whatever that news was, I could go look it up on FinViz, but whatever that news was just sent the stock exploding higher. So looking good there. I'd suggest using the P stop once it kicks in. So moving down the list of open trades here, we have Neo, which has gone through the target. It looks like it's really close to the compensation target, which I had drawn above here. So trailing stops moved up. Everything about this looks good too. Amazingly enough, if you look at yesterday when the market itself tanked, this had a pretty big up day, right? So that's kind of unusual that it bucked the trend. But quite frankly, I saw quite a few of the stocks on the list that did that. You'll see them as we go through them. Stocks that actually put on a green day yesterday, while a lot of things got hammered. So beautiful pattern there. I can zoom out on that a little bit, and it kind of didn't do it wasn't doing a whole lot back over here, but then it had this big run up, and then of course it pulled back and created sort of a nice little base back over here, and more importantly broke that trend line and triggered in. And so that was it was kind of like a little wedge formed there. And I don't always draw the bottom of the pattern, but it was a beautiful little sort of pullback, consolidation, and then a resumption of the trend. And so looking pretty darn good there. Let's move on here. Next one on the list, VNET. As you can see, this one had a pretty nice little wedge too. Triggered in like right around the area as it was breaking out of the wedge, and it doesn't look like that target's very far away, but it's kind of a low price stock, and so percentage wise, that was a pretty significant move there. So from the trigger up there to the target, pretty decent percentage move. And this one basically triggered in right at the trigger price. Like there was no gap up or gap down or anything like that, and so pushed through the target. It's had a little bit of a pullback here, and it's looking pretty good so far this morning. You can see the trailing stop basically stayed in the same spot for a while, and then it just trailed back up. So if the price gets a little forward movement and gets back above this target, then I would expect the trailing stop to come up probably just in the neighborhood of yesterday's low. So the idea obviously is for the trailing stop, and the system calculates this automatically, but for the trailing stop to be just wide enough so that to keep us in the position for normal price fluctuation, right? Like you get a run up like this, and then you get a little 3-day pullback, and you don't want to get knocked out on that. And so the idea is to give it just enough breathing room so you don't get knocked out on normal price fluctuation, but still keep that trailing stop in to protect the position. So that one's looking pretty good. Moving down the list, we have PayPal, which had a pretty nice run up there, you can sort of see, you can sort of see this trigger price here. Um, it just sort of depends on the pattern, right? Like this one sold down and then it sort of had this pivot low and kind of came back, but um, it didn't trigger in until, it sort of took out these previous highs here. So it's kind of like a little inverse head and shoulders looking pattern there. And so, triggered in this day, and you can see the initial stop was down here, not quite at the bottom of the pattern. It's moved up a few times, and so far so good. Didn't quite make it to the target on that initial run, and so the idea is it may pull back and consolidate, and then if the market cooperates, get that run up and tag the target, and it looks like it's kind of setting up for a move back towards these previous highs. Of course, you never know, but anyway, it's nice to see that stop come up. Sometimes it moves on the first day, sometimes it takes some time. It's all just based on the price action. So, a couple of quality names here. Here's Microsoft. Microsoft, I mentioned this also, is that, everybody loves Microsoft, obviously, as a stock. I mean, it's done great. However, on a near-term basis, like on sort of a day-to-day basis, it can be kind of boring, right? So you can see what it's doing here. Oh, by the way, this target 1 and target 2 here. This is the recovery watch list, right? So Microsoft sold off big time back in February and March, and we introduced the recovery watch list. That's what those marks are about. This was the entry, and these were the targets, and you can see it more than recovered. But right now, it's in like this big sort of consolidation, like a box almost, just boxed in between, say, 215 and these lows here around 196. And trading sideways. This stop moving up here, um, very close to the price action. If this thing fades down anymore, it's going to tag that stop. But if yesterday's low, like if the market, if yesterday's low was sort of a one-off one-time shock, and the market, these big cap tech stocks, continue on their merry way higher, then this is going to, work its way back up. So this one's a little dicey looking here. Um, Big scheme of things, really tight stop though. 4.5 bucks on a $208 stock. It's a pretty tight stop. So see what happens with that. Next up, CENTA, which you can see had a pretty good day yesterday and is trading above the target here. So had a good trade in this one back over here in July, and then had kind of a run up into earnings. That was the earnings pop, and so had a nice long duration pullback. Broke out of this falling channel, triggered in again, and it's kind of a persistent sort of straight up move, which is sort of interesting, but it is what it is, and looking pretty good. Trailing stop moved a couple of times. There's the trigger. It's hard to see sometimes, but trigger over here at 35. So triggered in like right here, and so looking pretty good. Like I said, it's kind of amazing. Yesterday's sell-off, for whatever reason, seemed to, it didn't seem to have that big of a negative effect on our open positions, right? So I was kind of surprised about that, but AMD looking good here. Triggered in, back here at 79 bucks. Made it through the target a couple days. Actually, it tagged the target last Thursday and was able to, break significantly above it. Yesterday it had a little bit of a down day, but nothing out of the ordinary, really, just kind of a pullback. And so here you can see now it's starting to clear the target. The trailing stop stayed in place for a long time. The initial trailing stop at the bottom of this pattern, And so it's just now moved up to, practically to break even. So I would say that if the stock continues this uptrend, then this trailing stop will be on, on the remaining part of the position will be above your entry. And so looking good. Beautiful cupping pattern here on AMD. So it's another, high powered stock that's looking good here. So can continue to jam through these. I know there's a lot of open trades, but that's sort of the nature of the cycles in the market, right? So when the market, when the market has a big up cycle and runs up and up and up and up, um, the pending list gets real small until there's practically nothing. And then when you get a sell off, all the open trades tend to have, the stops have been raised in that. And so when you get a market sell off, like we had, well, let's see, market sell off back over here at the beginning of September, you get one of these market sell offs. And so, I mean, basically by the second day of this, there was almost no open trades, right? So everything triggered in on the run up. And the trailing stops obviously come up, and then you get a day like this, and then boom, they all get closed. And then as the market sells off, they start to set up again. And then when the market, rallies, they get triggered in. And so that's why the list has just been growing and growing and growing. And so if we get a down cycle, then if we get another down cycle, then a lot of these will get knocked out. But based on where some of the trailing stops are, it'd be kind of nice to see. It'd be nice to see sort of a continuation higher in the overall market and give the trailing stops some time to get up there. This ROL here, Rollins Inc. The target's 56. There's another one I didn't actually draw the target on, but so there is target, which you can see yesterday just plowed right through it and then faded a little bit with the overall market, but kind of amazed at the resilience of some of these stocks based on the idea of what the market actually did yesterday. So it's kind of interesting to me. So maybe the sell off didn't hit some of these other stocks the way that it did. The funny thing was the Russell 2000 is starting to get strong again. The IWM, which is sort of interesting, and that's typically a good harbinger of a strong market is when the smaller stocks perform well. So another beautiful pattern, falling channel breakout, broke out, pulled back a little bit, continuing higher. It's as we speak here, it's kind of flirting with these highs, and so it may take a little bit of consolidation or whatever before it can break out of this high. But so far so good. This is exactly what you want to see. Moving on, Docu looking pretty good here. It's there's one of these cases where, let's see if I can get that right at 234. Drawing on these charts like this is the reason I still use these free stock charts is because they're so easy to draw on compared to anything else, right? I mean, if I had my Thinkorswim on this computer and was trying to do this show on Thinkorswim, like trying to zoom in and out and flip through symbols and draw stuff on the charts, and that is a whole different animal, right? It's a lot more difficult and it's just not as easy to do. So I've been using these for so long that and all of a sudden now they're delayed, right? Which is kind of it's not that big of a deal. I have all these open trades over on my other workstation, which is basically my trading computer, but I've just found that the free stock charts are so easy for marking stuff up on the chart. So as you can see here, this thing triggered in at 207, and so by the way, as I'm working my way like down the list here, um, this triggered in on 922. So I started at the top, which is basically the newest ones, and then as I work my way down the list, these are some that have been open for a while. So looking good here though. Everything about this looks good. I had drawn this as like sort of a major support level there, and you can see how it pulled back, bounced off that support, and we got triggered in sort of on the way back up. So everything looking pretty good here. Notice that the trailing stop is now moved up to the exact same as the trigger price. It tagged the target, the compensation target for this little bit of a gap up on the day it triggered, interestingly enough, has not been hit yet. And so it'll be interesting to see if it is able to get to that. It'd be kind of a little bit frustrating if you were using the compensation target and it came that close to it and then faded down, but it is what it is. So you have a little flexibility in how you want to manage these. But the nice thing about having the trailing stop basically at the trigger price is that there's literally almost no risk in this swing trade right now. And so the stock is, it's in an uptrend right now. Just needs to get a little something going to the upside here. Getting down towards the bottom of the list. Here is Zscaler, ZS, looking good. Here's another one that had a pullback right to basically like a major sort of, trend line support. Had that pivot low right there, bounced off of it, started moving higher, triggered in on the way up, and as we speak here, see yesterday it managed to get through the target, poked at it, and this morning it's poked above the target there. And so looking pretty good. This is another good looking stock. This sort of pattern here and the way that it's had this run off of this pivot low, I'm sort of wondering if it could just keep going at this trajectory, but you never know. I mean, back over here it was something very similar. It was a very similar sort of run up. I could draw an uptrend line across these lows here, something similar to that. But now you can just see that it had a pretty good run, and it culminated with a big long range bar. And then this was potentially the earnings for the company. I'm not sure, but a lot of times I know we had earnings season, and so that pattern to me with the big long range day and the gap up. And then a lot of times you get a stock that makes that sort of crazy move like that, culminates in the gap up, and then fades down, has a pullback. So could potentially do the same thing here. Just depends. Let's see, I was looking at now earnings are actually, I can see over on my other screen that there's a handful of these open trades that have like the little earnings things next to them. And so I'll have to keep an eye on that because, as you know, we close the open trades ahead of earnings. So, all right, we're almost through the list here now. Here's a nice one, Etsy. Look at that, Etsy. That was pretty amazing at the persistent uptrend ever since the just persistent recent uptrend. It's kind of one of these things where it has all these higher highs sort of on a day-to-day basis. A little consolidation here around the target, but and another falling channel, right? Amazingly enough, there's like 3 of these stocks that had very similar sort of pattern. The falling wedges, falling channels, and they're pretty powerful patterns when price breaks out of it in a bull market, which I'm going to I'm going to assume that we're still in a bull market. Um, they like to call it a secular bull market on TV, even though we had a 40% pullback in the overall market sort of on the way. But regardless, I mean, stocks are acting well, right? And so that's the most important thing. Um, it's kind of funny. I read something a while back that said that bull markets and bear markets they're not just numbers, 20%, whatever. It's more about how stocks act on sort of a consistent basis, and so when everything just consistently goes down and gets hammered and that type of thing, and no matter what, just about every stock is going down, then that's a bear market. And the same thing, so bull market is when you get these pullbacks and then stocks continue to act well. And so nobody can deny that that stocks are acting well. Now there's obviously some debate about how narrow the market is, but it seems like in certain sectors are not doing so hot, but it certainly seems like there's plenty of stocks that have really good patterns. And so like I mentioned last week, the thing to focus on is the chart setup and not worry so much about the market, right? Look at yesterday. I mean, just a little blip on the chart, and this Etsy continues this run here, getting really close to that prior high. So it's going to be interesting to see how this does going forward. So okay, moving on real quick here. QGEN. Funniest thing about QGEN is that this was one that back over here, when it triggered in and we were looking at it on the pending list, my personal thought was that it looked like a mess and it was all gappy, and there was nothing about this pattern that I liked, and so and then it happened to trigger in like way up here after this crazy sort of sell, and look at it. Um, triggered in straight up to the target, hung around the target, and just, blasted off. So it's pretty amazing. Funny thing. So, as of yesterday's close, this was up 8% from the trigger price, but you can see the trailing stops kind of as it's sort of migrated higher. So yeah, this is just it's always been a weird stock. And if you look at this is the first trade that we had in this back over the summer, and then a pullback, and then another one in August here, and then another one here in September. So this is I don't think that I've ever seen any of these stocks that have I don't think I've ever seen a stock that's had like 3 trades in a row like this, and quite frankly, all 3 of them did pretty good. So I shouldn't have been so hesitant. I just something about this weird looking gappy pattern that just I like a pattern that's that's easy to spot and draw some lines on, and that just with some symmetry to it. This thing just a mess, but just goes to show you it can still work, right? SE, this is a beauty here. Here's another one that basically yesterday it didn't care about the market sell-off. It just went up and poked a new high. So today it's now that it's hit a new high, it may come in a little bit, but everything looking good here. So this thing's been open for a while. The trigger price was basically back here when it pulled back, consolidated, started to turn back up. So it's formed a pretty nice cup, and you know, and you can see that trailing stops come all the way up to this recent consolidation here. So, um, it made a pretty good move right to the target, which doesn't seem like a whole lot on the chart, but pretty significant really. And now it's trading well above the target, and so got a protective stop like right under that consolidation. So far, so good. And last but not least, DHI, which is continuing on its merry way, right? Stop trailing up, and so everything's still looking pretty good here. And this was as you guys know, if you watched last week, this was the whole mock-up thing here. This was a mock-up from back when this stock was on the pending list before it ever even triggered in, and it triggered in like way back over here, right? And it's had some ups and downs and choppiness in the meantime, and managed the trailing stop. This is probably the best example of the trailing stop, being smart enough to keep us in all this price fluctuation without getting knocked out. And then so the stock is basically doing what you want it to do, which is work its way up, to the target and then past the target. So these lines don't mean anything. They were basically what I was just talking about, the symmetry. When I originally drew these, I was pointing out the symmetry between this and how it was setting up to do something similar over here. And so that's basically what it did. So that's why chart patterns are great, because the symmetry is something that, patterns repeat themselves. So anyway, so that's a look at the open trades. Everything looking pretty good, and so far so good. I know there's a lot of them, and so if we get a little bit of strength here in the market, and some of these trailing stops can come up a little bit more. The nice thing is that a lot of the open trades, they have fairly decent gains, and as you can see, a good number of them have already hit the target, and so now it's just a matter of riding the trend for what it's worth, and then if for some reason the market decides to sell off, a lot of them, the trailing stop now has worked its way up to at least break even, and so no big deal, right? And I would imagine that, if we get some forward progress in some of these stocks, that the one thing I didn't mention is that this QGEN, this also has that parabolic stop. So if you're not familiar with the parabolic stop, you can see what it's all about on the strategies page. But yesterday's low was 53.88. That low was 53.73, and the parabolic stop, which we call the P stop, is right here, just under that low. The thing about it, the P stop on a stock like this, and I've pointed this out, this QGEN NV, this is a foreign company, and so it tends to be gappy, right? It's going to gap and gap and gap. So, hey, theoretically, having a stop right there, it could easily gap below that, right? Typically, the gaps on this are going to come overnight. Because it probably trades, on the Amsterdam exchange or something else or whatever. And so, sorry about that. I accidentally hit the mic. So anyway, take it for what it's worth. But basically, this is a 53.70. Yesterday's low is a good spot to protect the gain on this trade. And, if it gapped down if it opened at 53.20 tomorrow or whatever, the idea is you might just want to take it off. But or if it reversed today and sold down through that. But the parabolic stop is a great place to just basically just lock it in. So that's what it's all about. So anyway, appreciate you guys tuning in today. Still working on the embed of the show on the show page, and like I mentioned last week, Google live stream or whatever has had some upgrades in that, and so I'm still trying to figure out how to embed the actual live show on the live show page. And so I'm doing the same thing this week that I did last week, which is just basically do the live show, and then as soon as I'm done with it, I'll go embed it on the page, and I think that'll be adequate for now. And then, I'm going to try and figure out how to actually get it embedded so that you guys can watch it at the normal time. So I did make a note on the live stream page that it's going to be, it's basically going to be available by 11 o'clock. And so, anyway, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you guys back here next week.